On November 4th, 2008, at 1:20 a.m., a cherry red 1995 Ford Explorer, driven by 17-year-old Hilario Ruiz Garcia, was speeding southbound on I-95. The SUV carried 5 passengers, one of which was Manuel Santis Cristiani. Manuel was in the front passenger seat. As they neared mile marker 47, the Hendersonville rest area, the treads of the right rear tire separated, causing the tire to blow. Hilario lost control of the Explorer and it rolled over multiple times. During one of the final rolls, Hilario, who wasn't wearing his seatbelt, was thrown from the car. He suffered multiple fractures and other traumatic injuries and was left partially pinned under the Explorer. Bystanders called 911 and were able to pull Hilario out from under the SUV. The foremen in the back were able to exit the vehicle and had all sustained minor injuries. Manuel was trapped in the passenger seat and had a critical head wound, among many other critical injuries. Firefighters from 4 different stations arrived and had to use hydraulic rescue tools to finally free him. He was treated at the scene by emergency paramedics who had to stabilize him by immediately performing a rapid sequence intubation maneuver to secure his airway before transport. It was a cloudy night, so no medical helicopters were able to fly to pick him up. To make matters worse, nearby Colleton Medical Center was dealing with a shooting victim and several other serious patients at the time of the accident. Their patient load now included the severely injured driver Hilario, who had already arrived in the time that it took to extricate Manuel from the vehicle and perform the rescue intubation. So doctors at Colleton had to divert Manuel's ambulance to MUSC in Charleston. Instead of the 15-minute trip it would have been to Colleton, he now had to travel over an hour to Charleston. He would remain in the hospital for nearly 3 months. As described in the legal complaint, his severe injuries would leave him with permanent injuries that would continue to cause great physical pain. This case is probably the least straightforward of all of the victims' cases. It was believed to have been settled in 2013, but a whole new case has sprung up, and Manuel is claiming he did not receive his settlement. With new filings as recent as this month, I thought it was a good time to dive in. I also wonder if the person behind this new filing is Manuel himself, or if he's simply being used as a pawn by others to try to cash in on the infamy and possible money from the Murdaugh case. This is Cassidy O'Connell with Murdaugh Money, The Victims. Victim number 8, Manuel Santis Cristiani. On this season of The Other 55%, the trial that consumed the entire true crime community and beyond.
And I could see his brain on...
Generating millions of dollars in fees, that was not enough for you.
I know you have to see Paul and Maggie during the night times when you're attempting to go to sleep. I'm sure they come and visit you.
All these people on these 2 exhibits, these were real people that needed this money, is that correct?
I'm sure they did.
Somebody going to check them?
Yes, sir. They've already checked them.
They did check them?
Yes, sir.
It's official that they're dead?
Yes, sir. That's what it looks like.
Oh, and it might not have been you. It might have been the monster you become.
The murder trial is over, and the next trial for his financial crimes is about to begin. We've heard the number of indictments. Let's go beyond the numbers. As Creighton said, these are real people. Let's hear their stories on Murdaugh Money, The Victims. It's The Other 55% with Cassidy O'Connell, because we don't know the half of it, and this time we probably never will. The statute of limitations to file an accident claim in South Carolina is 3 years from the date of the injury. 2 months and 5 days before that time was up, on August 30th, 2011, Manuel's attorneys, PMPED, filed a summons and complaint in Colleton County. It's signed by William Barnes and lists Barnes Alex, and Ronnie Crosby as attorneys for the plaintiff. On this original filing, the defendants are the driver, Ford Motor, and Michelin North America. Points 1 to 5 identify everyone, pointing out that both Manuel and Hilario are citizens of Mexico. The car was the 1995 Ford Explorer, and the faulty tire was a Michelin tire. Points 7 and 8 identify the wrong year of the accident. It actually happened in 2008, not 2009 as we see here. We saw this in the paperwork for Blondell Gary, but it always shocks me to find these kinds of mistakes in paperwork that's filed by multi-million-dollar law firms. But another thing that struck me is how many of these accidents we've come across on this particular highway, and how many of them have been linked to tires with separated treads. Just a reminder to everyone to always check on your tires and keep them properly maintained. This original complaint lists the alleged negligence factors concerning the 17-year-old driver. They encompass failing to keep his vehicle under proper control, traveling too fast for conditions, operating a vehicle in disregard for the safety of others, failing to use the degree of care and caution that's reasonably expected, failing to keep a proper lookout, and failing to exercise due care. Later, the driver is dropped in a future complaint. The complaint then moves on to defendant Ford. It accuses them of failing to implement design standards that ensure stability and controllability of its vehicles during a tire failure, inadequate design to ensure controllability, and failing to warn of the likelihood of a rollover following a tread separation, and failing to warn and instruct with regard to dangers of tire degradation. And then it's Michelin's turn for designing, manufacturing, and selling the tire when it knew or should have known that it was dangerously defective because of its propensity for a tread belt separation, which was inherent in the design of the tire. Failing to use a nylon overlay or cat ply in the construction of the tire to reduce the propensity for tread belt separation. Failing to use proper manufacturing and quality control techniques. Failing to warn of the dangers associated with tire aging, and in failing to instruct owners of its products on the proper method to determine the age of a tire. Failing to inform tire dealers and tire service technicians of the dangers associated with tire aging, and lastly, failing to act in a reasonably prudent manner. In point 11, we read about the seriousness of his injuries, where it says, "The plaintiff suffered severe and permanent injuries from which he has suffered and will continue to suffer great physical pain and mental anguish, has expended and will in the future expend monies for medical care and treatment, and caused to lose the enjoyment of life." On this summons, we see that as usual, defendants were given 30 days to answer the complaint, or plaintiff could win by default. I don't have a copy of the answers from Ford or Michelin, but the next filing I have fills in some of the blanks. It's Ford Motor Company's motion to dismiss for failure to prosecute, and it was filed on October 3rd, 2012. Point 1, at least they get the date right, it's November 4th, 2008. Then it goes on to tell us that the plaintiff was a citizen of Mexico and was an illegal alien in the United States at the time of the accident, that he remains a citizen of Mexico and currently resides in Mexico. Points 5 and 6 point out the difficulty in pinning down these depositions. It says that there was originally one noticed for June 21st, 2012, but that was canceled because the plaintiff couldn't appear, so it was rescheduled for September 19th and 20th of 2012, but was again canceled for the same reason, the plaintiff's inability to appear. So the delay seemed to come from Manuel's inability to make it to South Carolina for the deposition. We do now know that he was here illegally, so that could be a factor. We don't know his exact injuries, but we know that they were bad and left permanent effects, so that could be a factor as well. Also an important note, Chiapas is the last state before the Guatemalan border, literally the furthest point in Mexico, and naturally he would have to cross the border. It would take time for him to be able to apply for the right papers to do that. After the failed appearances for the depositions, the court entered a scheduling order with deadlines for completing discovery and mediation. A scheduling order, by the way, is exactly what it sounds like. It's a court order that sets deadlines on when events in a case must occur, especially in cases that have been dragged out like this one was. So in this case, the plaintiff's expert disclosure deadline was November 1st, 2012, and the defendant's January 1st, 2013, with the trial on or after May 1st, 2013. They go on to add that plaintiff's failures to appear for deposition constitutes neglect and hampers defense's ability to prepare for trial, and they move to dismiss based on that. They do have a point. They can't begin to make their case until they receive discovery from the plaintiffs. So they need these depositions and expert testimony in order for themselves to start building their defense case. So after the judge sets these deadlines, on March 8, 2013, Manuel is finally able to travel to Hampton County for mediation. Blanca Simpson, who you might remember from the murder trial, she was the housekeeper for the Murdaughs after Gloria Satterfield. And as she testified, she would often interpret for Spanish-speaking clients. So Blanca Simpson is there to interpret on this case. Because settlements are not paid out on the day they're accepted, and this one being international delays it even longer, Manuel signs over power of attorney to none other than Russell Laffitte, who is supposed to then send the money to him in Mexico. What could possibly go wrong? A quick peek into what was going on in the world of Alex and Russell at this time is certainly warranted. Let's look back at the ledger I'm making as we go through these victim stories. Most of these I've already covered, so it's already been filled in with dates, the name of the client that was stolen from, the amount that was stolen, and where the money went. So looking at this chart, this case was originally filed 2 weeks before the first money was taken from the Plyler account, so we know at this time Alex is growing desperate for money. On March 8, 2013, the case is settled through mediation, but of course it will take time for money to be exchanged. A glance at the ledger shows that March 8th lands squarely in the middle of the Donna Badger stealing, and the Plyler girl stealing is still going on as well. If Alex felt no pity for 2 orphan girls and a widower with a house full of kids about to lose his home, it's hard to imagine him feeling any pity for an illegal alien from Mexico who no longer lived in the United States. But that's just my assumption. But we'll see what happens when the money finally comes through. A motion is filed on October 21st, 2022. We'll see some familiar names here. It's none other than William Barnes, who had done the majority of the work on the Manuel case, and his fellow PMPED partner, Ronnie Crosby, together with said law firm. It seems they don't want to be lumped in with Alex on this case and want to wash themselves clean of the stink of him. They interplead to be dismissed and deny any involvement with any wrongdoing on this case. This 9-page file comes with exhibits, and if you've been watching, you know I love exhibits. They're usually the real meat of these papers and fill in most of our questions. This one is very helpful indeed, so let's get started. The hearing involving this case got quite heated, as you can imagine. After all, it took place once Alex's stealing was made known, and basically accuses them of being involved in it. They want to keep their reputations after Alex has already destroyed the firm's reputation. So let's see how it goes. They start with the funds in question. We'll get to what these funds are, but for now, we see that they're funds that PMPED are holding that they want to deposit. But what they seem to want more than anything is to be removed from this lawsuit and their names to be cleared, and understandably so, especially as we'll go on to see the language in these complaints. They will already be forever tarnished by their association with Alex Murdaugh. I'm going to play some clips here from Ronnie Crosby's testimony in the murder trial, where we'll see him being questioned by Creighton Waters, and we'll also see Dick Harpootlian attempting to provoke him.
Ronnie Crosby, C-R-O-S-B-Y.
Strike that.
You're trying to take me somewhere that you probably don't want to.
Oh, no, I think I want to.
Answer the question.
Withdraw the question. Let me ask you this question. Maybe let's get to the meat of the matter here. Have you had to come out of pocket to pay back the money he stole?
Yes, and if you...
How much? Don't tell me you don't know.
Well, we're still counting, Mr. Harpootlian.
Well, how much have you paid so far?
We have had to borrow millions to pay back.
No, how much have you had to come out of pocket?
Well, when you borrow it, you got to pay it back, and I couldn't tell you how much has exactly been paid back as of we sit here today. But yes, and if you're implying that I would come in here and somehow shade truth in any way because of that, I would take high offense with that, Mr. Harpootlian.
I'm concerned about your high offense. Are you angry at him for stealing your money?
I have no feeling one way or the other.
You don't have any feeling about Alec Murdaugh betraying you and stealing your money. I admire you. I don't know that I could look beyond that.
Objection, Your Honor. It is sustained. It's not a question of the jury. It's to disregard the argument.
You are not angry with Alec Murdaugh?
I have had anger with him, extreme anger, Mr. Hart-Pootlian, because of what he did to my law firm, my partners, my client, his clients, our clients, what he did to his family, what he's did to so many people. Yes, I experienced a lot of anger. But you can't walk around with anger. You have to find a way to deal with it and move forward. And I have done that. And if you suggest, you are dead wrong if you think I've come in here and told this jury something because of money. When we're talking about two people who were brutally murdered, then you're headed in the wrong direction.
Do you think he did it?
I don't have an opinion. I don't have the benefit of the materials you have.
Well, let me ask you this. You're angry with him, stole millions of dollars from your firm. You admit your firm's not even called the Murdaugh firm anymore, right?
It is not. I don't admit that I'm angry right now. I told you I've gotten away from that. I don't have any feelings because you can't walk around with anger. I have been very, very angry about it because of what he's done. And he did it in a very callous way, a very deceitful way.
And you carry no, I'm sorry, maybe I just saw some anger there. Were you angry just a moment ago?
No, you keep trying to push a question and don't want to accept my answer, which is what it is.
That you've just given your zen, your nirvana, your whatever the...
Your Honor, objection.
Mr. Hart-Pootlian,
forgiven him?
I came to the scene of these murders to support my partner. I was there. I saw things that hadn't even been talked about in this courtroom. I was there. I love Paul very much. I thought I knew who Alec was. I did not. And it's hard to you might not understand, but it's hard to walk around with anger, and hard to even walk around with it when it's with somebody who you didn't know and didn't understand. So you might have be that way, but you know, I've got to function, I've got a family, I've got to move on with life.
And even though it's cost you your firm and it's cost millions of dollars to you, you have forgiven him? You bear him no ill?
I didn't say I forgave him.
You're just not angry about it anymore.
I said I have no feelings. And I had to work on that, Mr. Hart-Pootlian. You know, when you go through what we've gone through, not only the trauma of losing people we loved in a double homicide, seeing the aftermath, and then learning that someone you worked with for more than 20 years had been stealing throughout a period of time and deceiving us, there's a lot of emotion there. And yes, it was bad in the fall of 2021, and I have found a way to have no feelings. It's not forgiveness, it's just I don't have any.
You're not angry here today. You're not angry at him at all.
I'm not angry. If I raise my voice, it's only because of the implication that you were trying to
the
make
implication
out of it.
that you might not want to help him in front of this jury here today because let me finish the question. Because he destroyed your firm, he stole millions of dollars you had to pay back. He deceived you. All that's away and is not influencing your testimony here today at all. If you'd answer that yes or no, then you can explain.
All those things happened, and it does not influence my testimony. I take the oath that I just took very seriously. And if you've got any indication that anything I said was inaccurate, I'll be glad to address it with you.
So I think that clip helps us understand the feelings behind the filing of this document. You can read the frustration in the words that he types here. This motion is based on the following incontrovertible facts, which are substantiated by public court records and the affidavits and documents attached to this motion. The undersigned certified that they did not consult with plaintiff's counsel prior to filing this motion, as it would serve no useful purpose. As the undersigned previously attempted to communicate with plaintiff's counsel concerning their basis for filing this action, but plaintiff's counsel did not respond to the undersigned's efforts to communicate with them. We found a few minutes ago that the case was settled in a mediation hearing on March 8, 2013, but now we find the plaintiff is claiming that he did not receive any funds, so the point of this document is to prove that this is false. This point number 1 reads, plaintiff was not aware of the terms of the settlement and did not receive any funds from the settlement. We'll see this accusation from the plaintiffs changes as time goes on. Point 2 reminds us of what the original case was, a rollover accident where PMPED was hired by Manuel, and this case was filed ultimately against Ford and Michelin, and counsel was Alex, Ronnie Crosby, and mostly carried out by William Barnes. In point 3, we're told Manuel doesn't speak English, so Blanca Simpson was engaged as interpreter and liaison, something that she testified during the murder trial that she often did for Alex's firm. Point 4 goes on to state that Manuel traveled from Mexico to Hampton, was present for the mediation, and that with Miss Simpson's interpretation, he was, in fact, fully aware of the terms and approved them. As mentioned earlier, due to his travel complications, Manuel grants power of attorney to Russell Laffitte so that Laffitte could sign the settlement papers on his behalf, and Russell does so once the mediation is finalized a few days later. Point 6 lets us know that Manuel's medical expenses came to $330,738.47, and the lack of payment had led to a case being filed against him by MUSC in the amount of $331,247.38. And I was really struck by this, having recently gone over the Gloria Satterfield case, where we saw that she was in the hospital for 3 weeks. Her medical bills were over $600,000. Manuel was in the hospital for almost 3 months, just a few days shy of 3 months, and his bills were half the amount of hers, and I believe in the same medical facility. So it makes me wonder, is this how much medical expenses have risen in that short time period? 10 years time period between these two hospitalizations. And yet what a difference in the cost. In point 7, we find Alex was able to reach a settlement agreement for the amount owed, and he got this over $300,000 bill reduced to only $70,000. That's quite a reduction, but I'm thinking in this case, the hospital might have concluded that with Manuel being a foreign national who had been in the U.S. illegally and had returned home, that money might very well have been written off. So maybe they were grateful to settle for any amount. Point 8 tells that after attorney and litigation fees, the settlement amount was $143,857.24. The agreed upon $70,000 was held in escrow and was supposed to go to pay off the MUSC lien, which would have left Manuel with $73,857.24. Point 9 kind of surprised me. That money wasn't paid for 3 years. Until August 11th, 2016, though the mediation was settled in March of 2013, so actually more than 3 years later. And here's where we find Alex doing a very Alex thing. We know from some of my earlier videos that Alex established his first Forge account in 2015. So here in point 9 we read, instead of making the agreed upon $70,000 payment to MUSC on or around August 11, 2016, Murdaugh requested that PMPED issue a check in the amount of $70,000 made payable to who? Of course, the fake Forge account. And we see Manuel added to the ledger here. By now, he's made quite a few deposits into it, and this $70,000 makes its way in as well on August 16, 2016, bringing his total of stolen money in 2016 up to $300,000. It just boggles my mind how he thought these hospitals were never going to contact the law firm and ask where their money is. How did he intend to deal with that? Did he just never think into the future or never expect to be called out on anything? I just cannot understand his way of thinking. But I guess when your entire life, your dad has been able to make any accountability in your life disappear, this is what you get. So here we see the check written out to Forge. It's signed by Alex, and he deposited into this fake Forge account. For any new viewers who might not know what Forge is, there's a real Forge company that sets up annuities for settlements. Alex created a doing business as bank account called Forge. He would have checks cut to Forge so that the firm would think that it was going into an annuity for his clients, but instead he would deposit those checks that were written out to Forge into his own fake Forge account as a way to launder the money. From there, he would immediately withdraw it and distribute it to himself, to Maggie, to his dad, to pay bills such as car payments or pay off boats, whatever he wanted at the time. Point 10 is Crosby and Barnes saying that they had no idea that this is what Alex was doing with the money. And I believe it. In all of the digging that they've done inside the firm, they haven't been able to come up with any other misconduct by any of the other lawyers. The only people so far who've been found to collect on these stolen funds have been Alex, Russell Laffitte, Corey Fleming, and the one case of Chad Westendorf where he did give back that money. Then, in October 2016, PMPED made a check payable to Manuel for his portion of the settlement. It was deposited at Palmetto State Bank on November 10, 2016, to be prepared to be wired to Mexico. Here we have a copy of the check. We see that it has Manuel's name on it. It was marked on the back for wire transfer, and it was deposited on November 10th. So far, so good. Point 12 tells us that immediately following that deposit, the funds were wired to Manuel's bank account in Mexico, and therefore this allegation is false. We even see the calculation into Mexican pesos. We see the bank account name, and here we have a copy of the wire transfer receipt. Now if we zoom in on it, we see Manuel's name, we see the name of the bank, we see the amount after fees. So from what I see here, it really does look like they did their part. So except for that $70,000 that was supposed to go to the hospital that Alex took and deposited in his fake forge account. So remember page 1 mentioned funds, and I said we would get to that. Let's find out what these funds are. Point 13 reads, in September of 2021, lawyers at PMPED uncovered Alex Murdaugh's fraudulent forge scheme and the theft of funds from clients, from the law firm, from his law partners, and family members individually. PMPED demanded Alex Murdaugh's immediate resignation and reported his misconduct promptly to law enforcement and attorney disciplinary authorities. And we know this is true. We know that a short time later, Alex lost his law license. 14. PMPED replenished its trust account for the money that Alex Murdaugh had misappropriated in connection with the Santis Cristiani settlement, depositing $70,000 thereto by PMPED, check number 150477, on September 27th of 2021. And I have here a copy of that check. We see in the memo what it's for. We see the date. We see the amount. And then there's a deposit ticket with all of that same information, including the same check number. And then 15 mentions these funds. PMPED presently retains the funds. So these are the funds that they were talking about. They're meant for the hospital, not Manuel, but the defendants don't know this at the time. This is the time when they were discovering all of what Alex had done. They were still digging to see how far-reaching it went. I mean, we can't even imagine the chaos that was happening in that office at the time. They simply saw $70,000 that had been misappropriated to the forge account and wanted to make it right. So they made a check. They didn't realize at the time that those funds weren't meant for Manuel, but they were meant for the hospital. And that's shown in Part 16. PMPED has made countless unsuccessful attempts to enter in contact with plaintiff, including through plaintiff's interpreter, Blanca Simpson, from late 2021 through the summer of 2022. So at the time of this filing, they were still holding those funds in escrow and trying to contact Manuel. And we have proof of that in Exhibits E through H. And this is why I love, love, love exhibits. There's just so much information to be found in the exhibits. So I love when I can get a hold of a file that includes the exhibits in it. So we're going to start with Exhibit E, and this is an affidavit from Lee D. Cope. He's an attorney with the Parker firm that used to be known as PMPED. He is not one of the named defendants. But he states in point 1, in late 2021 or early 2022, I ran into Blanca Simpson at the Food Line grocery store in Hampton, South Carolina. We were talking about how she was doing in the aftermath of Maggie and Paul's death and the discovery of Alex's thefts. She also brought up the Cristiani matter, with which I was only vaguely familiar. I told her we should meet at the office to discuss. Sometime after that encounter, she came to the office. She informed me that she'd been in contact with Cristiani and that he did not want his money in a Mexican bank account because the government would take it. Instead, he wanted it in an account here in the United States. She told me that he wanted her to have control over the account. I told her that we would need to talk with him before we could do anything like that. She then explained it was very difficult to contact him. I responded that we would need to do so before any further action could be taken. So after I read this, my mind was just asking me, is Blanca shady? I really didn't want Blanca to be shady because to me she was one of the heroes of the murder trial. This really is an odd request. I mean, she's not his family. She's not a close friend. She was an interpreter. So why would he entrust that kind of money to her? $70,000 to really a stranger. And if the firm couldn't safely send the money to him, how was she going to do that? How was she going to get that money to him that he would prefer it to be in her hands, the hands of a stranger, than wired from the law firm or kept in escrow by the law firm? So very strange request indeed. And next we have Ronnie Crosby's affidavit. Ronnie Crosby from the clips we had at the beginning of the video. And he goes on in point 3, on October 10th, 2022, I was made aware of a lawsuit brought against me by Manuel Santis Cristiani. Prior to that point, I had not been made aware of a potential claim against me. As of October 18th, when he's preparing this, I still have not been served with the lawsuit. On June 2022, I spoke to Blanca Simpson as part of our continuing effort to advise Mr. Santis Cristiani about monies that we had restored to trust following the discovery of the theft of $70,000 by Alex Murdaugh. After Mrs. Simpson informed me that Corey Williams was representing Mr. Santis Cristiani, I called Mr. Williams and informed him of the money in trust. Mr. Williams said he would get back to me. So I could see him when he hears about this case being brought. I'm sure he's thinking, oh, I bet it's about that $70,000. No problem. I'll call Mr. Williams. I'll tell him we'd already discovered this money. It's already been sitting in escrow waiting. He's probably thinking this is a very easy fix. On July 27, 2022, I received a call from attorney Glenn Walters, who indicated that Mr. Williams had associated him to help on the case. Now, there's 2 lawyers on the case. I told him we were represented by attorney Wallace Lightsey and told him to reach out to Mr. Lightsey. After our conversation, I called Mr. Walters back and told him that we would provide a copy of the file if he would provide a written authorization signed by Mr. Santis Cristiani. Again, he can't just send out files to a lawyer who claims to be representing a client without seeing the actual signed authorization. The lawsuit accuses me of being in a conspiracy with others and stealing from a client. After reviewing the allegations, I knew I had done nothing wrong and knew that some of the more relevant allegations were in fact false. On October 11, 2022, I reached out to Mrs. Simpson and asked her if she was aware that Mr. Santis Cristiani had filed a lawsuit and named me personally. She told me that she learned about it the day before in a conversation with William Barnes. I asked Mrs. Simpson specifically about paragraph 20, that Mr. Santis Cristiani was not informed of the amount of funds and has never received the funds. Mrs. Simpson told me that Mr. Santis Cristiani was aware of the settlement and had in fact received funds. Mrs. Simpson told me that she had power of attorney over Mr. Santis Cristiani and that she signed paperwork with Corey Williams to represent Mr. Santis Cristiani. So I'm starting to feel, oh good, Blanca might not be shady after all. So here's to hoping for that. I asked Mrs. Simpson why William Barnes and I had been sued. She confirmed that she was unaware of anything we had done wrong. She also told me that this wasn't supposed to go this far, and this was supposed to be a settlement with the firm because of all that had gone on. So this sentence has really vibrated around the community. It's caused a lot of people to wonder what this is all about. This wasn't supposed to go this far? What does this mean? How far was it supposed to go? Really, what did she mean by that? This wasn't supposed to go this far. I guess we'll have to wait and see how this case all plays out to sort out what that means. But this lawsuit that he's referring to in this affidavit was filed on October 7th, as he said. It's a summons and a complaint filed by Glenn Walters Sr. and Corey L. Williams, both of Orangeburg, South Carolina. It starts strong with the year typed twice. I just had to point that out. Again, these prestigious law firms and their typos. Dated October 7th, 2022. It demands a jury trial, and it lists Alex, Ronnie Crosby, William Barnes, Russell Laffitte, Palmetto State Bank, and PMPED as defendants. They're just going after everybody. Now, points 1 through 19 we're going to skip. They're a run through of all the story that we've already been through today, ending up with the depositing of the settlement funds in Palmetto State Bank. So I'm going to pick up here with point 20, where it says, defendants failed to inform plaintiff of the amount of funds recovered on his behalf, and to this date, the plaintiff has never received the funds. Defendant Russell served as conservator, received the funds for deposit in defendant Palmetto Bank. It's Palmetto State Bank, so I will be saying that throughout, but this document continues to just call it Palmetto Bank. Some of the funds were also deposited by the defendant attorneys in defendant Palmetto State Bank. Plaintiff is entitled to an accounting of all funds recovered. Plaintiff never received an accounting from any defendant. Plaintiff hereby demands from the defendants an immediate, full, complete, and accurate accounting of any and all funds, costs, and expenses, as well as all supporting documentation for the same. So they're saying not only did they not receive the funds, but that he did not receive any disbursement sheets to say how much money was received and where all of those funds went to. And I could see this happening. I remember for the Gloria Satterfield case, that there was a disbursement sheet that had been put before the court, and then in a later hearing, it was a completely different disbursement sheet. And no one had caught it, no one had noticed it. So could it be that he was never shown a disbursement sheet? It's possible. We'll have to wait and see how it plays out, if they're able to produce one that he had actually seen. Going on, as of the filing of this complaint, the plaintiff has received no money as a result of the settlement of civil action number, then it lists the case number. Defendants Murdaugh, Barnes, Crosby, and PMPED, now this is where it starts to get really ugly, aided and abetted defendants Laffitte and Palmetto in the breach of their fiduciary duties. Alex, yes. The others, I don't think so. Not even Russell Laffitte this time. Continues to get even uglier by participating in a scheme through which the plaintiff would not receive the proceeds of any settlement. It gets more dramatic, uglier. Plaintiff suffered a substantial sum of actual damages, including intangible damages such as humiliation. What? Okay. Emotional distress, pain, and suffering, reckless, egregious, deliberate, or done in a grossly negligent manner. Getting even more colorful, defendants combined for the purpose of injuring the plaintiff. They're now putting motive to it. Not only was it bad, but they intended to injure the plaintiff. The plaintiff has suffered special damages in that he has been forced to incur legal expenses to stop these unlawful actions, and he has suffered a total loss of his settlement proceeds. Point 43, the defendants have unlawfully converted the plaintiff's, another typo, the settlement funds. The next points, however, are hard to deny. Defendants owed the plaintiff the duty to exercise reasonable care in the retention, hiring, training, and supervision of all attorneys. It's really hard to come up with any response to that because it's true. How was Alex able to steal millions of dollars? How was he able to make a fake forge account, not one, but two fake forge accounts, and just let those checks be written out and just sent out there with nobody ever checking on them? Defendants breached their duty of care and otherwise acted in a negligent, grossly negligent, willful, wanton, and reckless manner, failing to adopt adequate policies and procedures regarding fiduciaries, failing to hire, train, and supervise its employees to perform fiduciary duties adequately and properly, failing to supervise their employees in a manner that would have discovered their misconduct, failing to audit plaintiff's settlement funds, failing to discover the misconduct of its employees due to a lack of supervision. And this is certainly true. This was a huge law firm. We've all seen pictures of it. Was there no accounting? Was there no auditing done in all the years that they didn't notice millions of dollars? Nobody else was checking on, did these plaintiffs receive their settlement money? It is inexcusable. I will give them this point. Now let's go back to the exhibits. We'll move on to William Barnes' affidavit. It's very similar to Crosby's. On October 10th, 2022, I was made aware of a lawsuit brought against me by Manuel Santis Cristiani. Prior to learning of the lawsuit on October 10th, I had not been made aware of a potential claim against me. As of October 20th, 2022, I still have not been served with the lawsuit. And then after reviewing the allegations, he says they are completely untrue. It goes on, again, very similar to Crosby's. On October 10th, I called Miss Simpson and the two of us had a 7-minute phone conversation. I asked Miss Simpson specifically about paragraph 20, which alleges that Mr. Santis Cristiani was not informed of the amount of funds recovered. Miss Simpson told me that Mr. Santis Cristiani was aware of the settlement and had in fact received funds from the case. Nearing the end of the conversation, she told me that she currently has power of attorney for Mr. Santis Cristiani. Miss Simpson expressed surprise that I had been personally named in the lawsuit and said you didn't do anything wrong. You and Ronnie Crosby should not be defendants in this case. She was neither aware that a lawsuit had been filed, nor had she seen, read, or reviewed the allegations. And this brings us to our final affidavit, which is from Chelsea Avant, also a lawyer at Parker's, formerly PMPED. And she states, after PMPED discovered misappropriation related to the settlement of Mr. Manuel Santis Cristiani, I was asked to locate and contact him to inform him of misappropriation of settlement funds in his case by Alex Murdaugh. Despite several attempts, I was unsuccessful in my efforts to speak with Manuel because he's a resident and citizen of Mexico. In February of 2022, my colleague Lee Cope informed me that Blanca Simpson had reliable contact information for Santis Cristiani. I texted Blanca Simpson on February 10th to request Manuel Santis Cristiani's phone number, and we can see a copy of that message right here. She says, "Hi Bianca, this is Chelsea Avant. Lee Cope mentioned to me the other day that you had Cristiani's phone number. Can you send it to me, please and thank you?" Blanca responds, "Hi Chelsea, hope you're well. This is the number Manuel gave me. Chelsea, please forgive me. I thought I sent the message and I just noticed I had not. My apologies." Chelsea replies, "No worries. Thank you so much for getting the number to me." She goes on in her affidavit. On March 10th, 2022, I tried to contact Manuel via text message using the number provided by Blanca. In this text message, I stated that our firm found a problem with his file that we needed to discuss with him. To date, I have not received a response. And we see a copy of this message as well. I will roughly translate it as it is written in Spanish. It says, "Hello Manuel, my name is Chelsea Avant. Alex Murdaugh had worked in my firm and I believe he handled your case. We have found a problem that we need to discuss with you. Can you speak English?" So it's pretty clear to me that as soon as a problem had been identified with the $70,000 that Alex had put into Fake Forge, these other attorneys did their best to make it right. As I mentioned before, all of this discussion was odd to me because the $70,000 was never supposed to go to Manuel, but it was to pay the hospital bill. But we've now come to the point where that is finally discovered by the other defendants. So it goes on. At that time, PMPED was not aware that the MUSC lien had not been satisfied, and therefore was endeavoring to have the funds sent to the plaintiff. Ms. Simpson represented that the plaintiff wanted Ms. Simpson to hold the funds for him in the U.S. and asked the PMPED pay the funds directly to Mrs. Simpson. Mr. Cope, however, insisted that PMPED attorneys speak with the plaintiff himself to confirm. Because Ms. Simpson never arranged such a call and plaintiff never provided such information, PMPED continued to keep the funds in trust. Again, they cannot simply hand over $70,000 to her because she said so, and without being able to contact Manuel, they really had no choice but to hold those funds, much as they didn't want to. PMPED does not dispute that the funds should be dispersed, but PMPED only recently learned of the outstanding lien held by MUSC, which calls into question whether plaintiff is entitled to these funds. MUSC has received no payment for medical services provided to plaintiff, and the $70,000 at issue was misappropriated by Alex Murdaugh from the MUSC, not from the plaintiff. For these reasons, PMPED files this Interpleader complaint seeking leave to deposit the funds with the court so that it may determine where the funds should properly be applied. PMPED asks that the court accept these funds, that PMPED be granted leave to interplead the funds. So they finally realized these funds were meant to go to the hospital. So after pointing that out to the court, they then plead with the court to accept these funds and that their firm be granted leave of them. They do not want to be responsible for these funds. Continuing with Part B of 27, Ronnie L. Crosby and William F. Barnes III be discharged from liability as to all claims in this matter and dismissed from this action with prejudice. They also ask that plaintiff be released from any further liability on the MUSC lien and that said lien and debt be fully discharged. They really want to be discharged from liability for this. Point 29, movements also ask the court to impose such sanctions as it deems appropriate for filing their complaint with highly defamatory and false allegations against movements without any investigation, without any good faith basis for the allegations, and without even requesting or reviewing the client file offered to them by Ronnie Crosby, which would have immediately alerted them to the fact that their allegations were false. So without even having a file, they create this document, and this document is public record, and it is in fact highly defamatory. We saw the words that they used, the accusing words that they used against these attorneys with, as far as I can see, no basis whatsoever. There's still a whole lot more to explore with this case, including a Texas notary that's found to have been practicing law without license, among other criminal acts. But I will wrap up that in part 2 of Murdaugh Money, The Victims, Manuel Santis Cristiani. So until then, this is Cassidy O'Connell saying stay well and stay tuned.